that was in late 1995 and into early 1996. There were 3 shutdowns in the standoff between the House and President Bill Clinton.
Yeah, and Chad, I got to say, we are now just seconds away from this. There are so many unknowns, but we're going to keep you there standing by because we're going to go into extended coverage, an extra hour at least tonight here on Fox News. Chad, you're a key portion of helping us figure out what is going on because this, as Chad said, would be our 3rd one this year. Stick around with us for extra coverage right here on this Fox News station. This is Fox News coverage of the partial government shutdown. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington, D.C. It is now midnight on the East Coast, and it is official. About 25% of the government is shutting down. Several federal agencies are affected, including the Departments of Homeland Security, Transportation, Agriculture, State and Justice, as well as National Parks and Forests. Many agencies, including the Pentagon and the Departments of Veterans Affairs and Health and Human Services, are funded for the year. They will continue to operate as usual. Your Christmas packages should continue to get delivered as the Postal Service is an independent agency, thus unaffected by the partial government shutdown. Amid the impact, Vice President Pence was dispatched to the Capitol to meet with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who said President Trump's demands for money, border wall, will not pass the Senate.
Abandon your shutdown strategy. You're not getting the wall today, next week, or on January 3rd when Democrats take control of the House.
This is our only chance that we'll ever have, in our opinion, because of the world and the way it breaks out, to get great border security.
President Trump is still here in Washington tonight. Despite earlier plans to go to Florida, he was going to head there tonight for the holidays. He has said he would accept money for a steel slat barrier with spikes on the top. You may have seen a picture he tweeted out today. He says it's going to be just as effective as a solid concrete type wall. Well, Democrat votes are needed, and without them, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is showing no interest in changing the rules, as President Trump proposed to allow for a simple majority, just 51 votes, to try to pass something here. So what next? Some House lawmakers are staying in town on call to resume negotiations amid the partial government shutdown. Analysis continues now on Fox News Channel, on cable and satellite. More later on your local news on this Fox station. I'm Shannon Bream for Fox News in Washington. President Trump tweeting out not long ago saying he hopes this partial shutdown is not a long one. Correspondent Kristen Fisher is live at the White House tonight with more reaction, and that's a little bit different than what he'd said just a couple of days ago, Kristen.
It is, and you know, President Trump said today that he is totally prepared for a long shutdown. He said he believes that this may be his only chance to get the funding for his promised his supporters during the campaign and throughout his presidency. But in this video that he just posted on Twitter tonight, he also said that he's hopeful that this partial shutdown will not last long.
We're going to have a shutdown. There's nothing we can do about that because we need the Democrats to give us their votes. Call it a Democrat shutdown, call it whatever you want, but we need their help to get this approved.
So the president is calling it a Democrat shutdown, while the Democrats are calling it the Trump shutdown, with the chairman of the DNC saying tonight that, quote, the Trump shutdown is here and American workers will pay the price. The president should be ashamed that he is targeting American workers with his latest temper tantrum right before the holidays. But the president thinks that this shutdown is worth it, both in order to keep his campaign promise and for border security.
It's very dangerous out there. Drugs are pouring in, human trafficking, so many different problems, including gangs like MS-13. We don't want them in the United States. We don't want them in our country. The only thing that's going to stop that is great border security. With a wall, a slat fence, or whatever you want to call it. but we need a great barrier. And if we don't have it, it's never going to work.
Now, President Trump has been pushing the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to end this partial shutdown by invoking the nuclear option, getting rid of the filibuster, which would allow the Senate to pass a bill with just a simple majority. But McConnell has repeatedly said that he won't do it because it could backfire and possibly end up hurting Republicans the next time Democrats control the Senate. Now, this partial government shutdown impacts 7 federal agencies, about 800,000 federal employees, and even President Trump's holiday plans. He was supposed to leave D.C. tonight and head to Florida to spend the holidays at Mar-a-Lago, but that's not going to happen. He is going to be staying here at the White House until tomorrow at the earliest, maybe even longer, depending on how this shutdown goes, Shannon.
Yeah, a lot of people changing their holiday and travel plans. Kristen, maybe even you and me. Thank you very much.
I hope not.
All right, well, let's go live to Peter Ducey on Capitol Hill, where it appears lawmakers have checked out, although we know they're in town. They may not be there with you, Peter.
Shannon, this is the hallway into the House chamber, and normally within minutes of a huge vote, like something maybe to keep the government open just at the shutdown deadline, it would be packed. But it's essentially empty except for a couple reporters because there was no vote. The Senate decided much earlier in the day that they did not have the votes to pass the House-approved border wall funding measure, so they just went home.
The Senate needs to take some action. The difficulty in the Senate, though, is it takes 60 votes. So it really comes down to Senator Schumer. If Senator Schumer is going to shut the government down again, I know he's done that earlier and it wasn't productive. So we're very hopeful that we can find common ground.
The Senate and House each adjourned they both adjourned with hours left on the countdown clock, even though some Republicans like Lindsey Graham were urging leaders to dig in and fight. The President Mike Pence and incoming White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney huddled with lawmakers until late, trying to figure out where there could be some give and take. But for now, Democrats are drawing a line in the sand, refusing any measure that would fund a border wall in any way, so nobody knows how long this partial shutdown will go.
It will depend upon the Republicans once again convincing Donald Trump that there are not the votes for his wall. Not today, not tomorrow, not in January. So, if there's some face-saving gesture, but this is not the way we ought to be operating in the United States of America.
The Vice President, Mike Pence, today also had to break a 47-47 tie on the measure to debate the spending bill in the Senate. It passed, and spending bills are extremely. McConnell laughed at just how technical this process has become.
Colleagues, when an agreement is reached, it will receive a vote here on the Senate floor. I move the House amendment to the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 695.
The motion is pending.
So after town tell me they're definitely going to be going home for Christmas. And so if there is not a speedy solution, like in the next couple of hours, then this could drag on a while. Shannon.
All right, Peter, we know you'll be on it there on the Hill by yourself. Thank you very much. We'll check back in with you. All right, they couldn't get it done on the Hill. Perhaps we can find some common ground right here. Fox News at Night, so let's bring in Congressman Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona, and Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, Democrat from Illinois. Thank you both for stopping in.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So tonight, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tells our Chad Pergram, who is over there on the Hill as well, quote, "I think constructive talks are underway." Congressman Biggs, what would it take to get your vote at this point?
Well, I think we need to keep $5 billion in there. I mean, that's less than 1/2 of 1% of the total budget of just this 25% bill we just did. And we need the border wall. We just have to have a border wall because border security is imperative.
But knowing that Democrats won't vote for that.
Well, I don't know that yet. They're saying that.
We'll ask one who's sitting
he said he didn't vote. He didn't vote for it in the House. But this is when they say they want border security, I want to know what the heck they think border security is. I live down in Arizona. I'm down at the border. I know what border security looks like. I talk to Border Patrol agents. I talk to ranchers who live on the border. I talk to people who live on the border, and they want a wall. And we know that with San Diego and the Isidro port, when that was created, it cut down illegal alien crossings by 85%. We know walls work. And I don't know why, if you say you believe in border security, why we don't do this.
Okay, so let's ask, Congressman, we have seen the statistics that show in these areas, and walls won't work everywhere geographically and you know, topographically and all that's not going to work. But if you are for border security, what does that mean for you? What will you vote for?
Well, I think we would, you know, look, we're a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation of laws, and we Democrats believe in enhancing the border security as well. But as Congressman Will Hurd, a Republican from a border state of Texas, explained the other day, we need smart border security. You know, a lot of undocumented immigrants in this country fly over on airplanes and overstay visas.
Yeah.
And let's talk about ways to deal with this in a smart way. This is not effective. And by the way, Mexico is not paying for it. The taxpayers of America are paying for this.
Okay.
That's not fair.
Regardless of who pays, what physically would you agree to at the border?
I definitely think that there's probably some room for, you know, maybe repairing certain barriers, maybe talking about fencing in certain areas. But, you know, this type of wall concept is not going anywhere. But let's hash out a deal to enhance border security. Let's get the government funded. Right now, 54,000 DHS, Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol agents are not going to be paid during the holidays. That's not right if we really care about border security.
Well, and to that point, the woman who will likely be the next Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, tweets this: maybe real Donald Trump and House GOP can't imagine living paycheck to paycheck like most Americans, but the Trump shutdown will force nearly 800,000 federal employees to go without pay right in the middle of the holidays. And to be clear, the vast majority of them are going to be paid back. But again, if you are on a tight budget, Congressman, how do you respond to that? She says most Americans. I don't know that most are living paycheck to paycheck, but for those who are, it's tough.
Yeah, yes, let's be honest. A significant number of Americans do live paycheck to paycheck. Nancy Pelosi is not one of them, by the way. But I actually talked to a union official for the Border Patrol Association a week ago. I said, if it comes to shutdown, he said, look, we're out there doing our job because that's what we commit to do. And we want to be there. And we need to have boots on the ground, and we're willing to do it. And by the way, he said, we want a wall. We're Border Patrol agents. We want a wall. You know, when we start talking about drones and technical gear, they have that. We already have that. What we need is a wall, a physical barrier, so it forces people to go to places where we can actually interdict them and catch them. That's why this is so critical.
Okay, Democrats in the past have voted for packages that had way more than $5 billion in them for border security. A lot of people say it's a rounding error for, you know, the federal government. Why the dig in over $5 billion?
Well, like I said, I mean, that $5 billion has been dedicated for the purpose of a wall. Let's talk about the right number. Let's hash it out. I'm a former small businessman. We shouldn't be shutting down the government. We should be negotiating. We should be talking right now. And if President Trump is listening, I think that, you know, I hope that he's reaching out to folks and talking to them about how do we get past this shutdown now.
Yeah, and it sounds like from what Chad's telling us that the leaders are working with the White House now to try to come up with something because the Senate has said they won't vote on anything. They don't know that the president's already agreed to, so they're on a bunch of show votes. That's kind of the deal they've reached now. But compromise-wise, what did the two sides do to get to a solution? It sounds like the White House is backing off of $5 billion, but what number could you agree to?
Well, I know that, you know, Senator Schumer put forward a number the other day. You have to remember, just 3 days ago, Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats unanimously passed a clean continuing resolution so that we could further discuss this issue of enhanced border security in February, okay? But right now, I think the two sides should come together, choose a number, and let's move forward.
Well, and Congresswoman Pelosi had said you couldn't pass over in the House this $5 billion bill, and I think that's kind of why the Senate voted the way that they did. But you all recognizing that February, you're not going to have any leverage, at least not on the House side. So where do you go tonight?
Right. Well, the reality is we're not going to get a wall if we don't do it now. I mean, that's just the reality because the Democrats have made it clear. Pelosi's made it clear. Schumer's made it clear. It's going to cost $25 billion. I would have started at 25 and worked down to 5, but we started at 5, And the number that Senator Schumer keeps putting out is 1.6, 1.3. We're at 5.7 now. And I'm just telling you, I wonder, have they been down to the border? Have they seen what goes on? I invite my colleague to come down. I'll take him to the border.
We'll come with you.
Yeah, I'd love to have you come.
Trip.
I'd love to have you come.
Yeah.
I'll show you the places where they caught 64 people yesterday, where there's a single strand. I mean, this is really critical, and it's national security.
All right, Congressman, thank you both for stopping in. And we wish you Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a solution for America. Thank you.
Maybe a Christmas miracle.
Yeah.
Hey,
that's what
we're
we're
all
looking
for
for
that in Washington. We can use them around here. All right, we'll plan our road trip later. Thank you.
Yes, there we go.
All right, the government has officially partially shut down, and both sides are pointing fingers, playing the blame game. Who are blames Democrats, he says, because they're not protecting this country and closing down the border. Democrats blaming President Trump, saying he shouldn't tie funding for the government and several agencies to funding his border wall.
Abandon your shutdown strategy. You're not getting the wall today, next week, or on January 3rd when Democrats take control of the House.
All right, senior Capitol Hill producer Chad Pergram is with us now on a very quiet night on Capitol Hill, although it is now official, Chad.
Well, the question is whether this is a partial government shutdown or sometimes you have these semantic battles here on Capitol Hill, a lapse in appropriations. That's the struggle that they'll talk about. Regardless, there are negotiations going on behind the scenes. We don't think anything is going to happen on Saturday. Saturday is the day that the House and Senate will both meet at noon. There's not going to be many members here. Everything will happen off stage. Now, Vice President Mike Pence and the acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, were here. Long talks throughout the day here at the Capitol, talking with Chuck Schumer and also talking with the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Richard Shelby. I'm going to tell you what Richard Shelby said after he emerged from the meeting with Mike Pence. There are a lot of moving parts around here. We're trying to get them moving together down the same road. They're trying to merge all of the appropriations bills, which are outstanding, together and get this in a package to move together. There's also some questions as to what President Trump would sign. You know, they thought they had a deal, which is why they put that bill on the floor the other night to fund the government through February 8th. They passed it in the Senate, and then the president blew it up a couple of days later. So Shelby said the following: we would all have to have assurances the president would agree to what we agree to, and he would sign it. So Sunday seems to be the operative day here, where they hope to have, as one official described it to me, some gravity around an agreement and maybe try to bring members back Sunday night, maybe early on Monday morning, Christmas Eve day. Remember, they did this in 2009 on the first vote to pass the initial version of Obamacare through the Senate. But if they don't get something then, and I've been told by multiple sources on both sides of the aisle that they are very skeptical of that scenario, that this could be the 26th, 27th, or even last until January. There's some who don't think that we'll solve this until next weekend. What they're really fighting over here is $900 million. That's million with an M, which is pocket lint in Washington, D.C. money, for a border wall or border security. They're at $1.6 billion is the proposal now. They want to take that up to about $2.5 billion. Democrats on both sides of the aisle say that they would reject that. In fact, I'm told that the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi, won't go any higher than $1.3 billion. So how they get this resolved by Sunday night is anybody's guess. But again, here's the key. If they can get an agreement, a big agreement, a universal agreement, which is how Bob Corker, the Republican senator from Tennessee, described it, on all the appropriations bills, then they're in business. I think that's the reason they were willing to get that bill on the floor. Keep in mind, they did that with a Democratic vote. Doug Jones, the Democratic senator from Alabama, and that's why there's some bipartisan cooperation going on behind the scenes. But the key is, what can President Trump accept?
All right, Chad Pergram, live on the Hill, burning the midnight oil. We'll check back with you. Thank you, Chad. All right, joining me now to talk about it, now that we're officially there, Fox News contributor Jamu Green, former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush, Brad Blakeman, and Fox News contributor, former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now that we're officially into the shutdown, I want to read a little bit from Vox. The headline, "Why the Blame Game Over the Government Shutdown is Pointless." They say this is basically how we do things now. They say shutdowns are a game of chicken and everybody is looking for leverage. This is just the way Washington works. Pending deadline to the best motivators to compel Congress to act, so lawmakers see any crisis as an opportunity to get their policy priorities accomplished. Jason, as a former lawmaker, I'll let you take a first swing at that.
No, I think they're right. I think it's a Washington, D.C. parlor game. I don't think in the heartland they much care who takes the blame and whatnot. They do care, though, about border security. And this is where I think the Democrats are in a really tough spot. They can't simultaneously say they're in favor of border security at the same time saying they don't want a border wall, they want to abolish ICE, they're in favor of sanctuary cities. It doesn't add up, and America will figure that out. That is much more important long term. And the president, I think, is doing the right thing, is standing tall and saying, no, we need a border wall in order to have security. And by the way, all those Border Patrol agents in the Border Patrol Union, they're on the side of the president, not the Democrats.
Okay, those are the folks who are working on the front lines. So we're getting a lot of reaction coming in tonight, minute by minute. We just got this in from the Republican National Committee saying this. They say tonight Democrats chose to shut down the government instead of working with Republicans and the president to secure the border. They go on to say Chuck Schumer and his colleagues must stop putting partisan politics over the security of our nation and fulfill their responsibilities to fund our government, keep our communities safe, and uphold the rule of law. Jamu, to you.
Well, first, let me say that we all should be able to agree that the shutdown was avoidable. It is only President Trump who is on the record saying, I would love a government shutdown. I would proudly own a government shutdown. But you know what? They're right. Let's move away from the blame game. And I think a point that's really important here, Shannon, is something y'all were talking about in a previous segment. It's actually 78% of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck. And the type of chaos and uncertainty that Donald Trump, I guess, embraced when he was running the Trump organization, that is not how you govern. And those 80%, up to 80% of government workers who probably are living paycheck to paycheck, uncertainty and chaos in December before Christmas, that's a real war on Christmas.
Well, Brad,
we have to get...
I'm sorry, finish your thought, Jamu. I thought you were done.
Just we have to get to a place where this is not business as usual. And I would ask one question to the president. Did you even try to make a deal with Mexico? Was there any attempt as he was making a deal around
We got a deal with Mexico, by the way. We got one.
For Mexico to pay for the wall. Did he even attempt
Well, they're
to have
keeping all the
Mexico
people
pay
there
for the
across
wall?
the border,
Or
so they're not coming in while they're trying to claim asylum.
Let me bring Brad in here because there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot of blame going on. But to Jamu's point, did the president give Democrats a gift last week when he said, I will take the mantle, I will own this. It doesn't even have to be yours.
The president is standing on principle. He's standing on the oath that he took to preserve and protect America. The president was honest with Democrats. He had let the Oval Office open to the press to listen to negotiations, something you don't see all the time. And you saw Schumer squirming at the fact that the press were in there. He couldn't even look the president in the eye. But Democrats were for border security before they were against it. Remember the Secure Fence Act of 2006, which passed the Senate 80-19, including Chuck Schumer and then Senator Obama, who voted for it. This is denying today the president a campaign promise. It's all about politics. And by the way, Jamu, Democratic congressmen and senators who voted against this aren't living paycheck to paycheck. During the shutdown, they're getting paid. They're with their families at Christmas. The president is in the Oval Office still trying to make a deal. But Democrats are denying the president. They're calling it, listen to their words, it's his wall. It's Republicans. It's their wall. It's not his wall or their wall. It's our wall. It's the Republicans and Democrats' obligation to secure this nation.
Well, and I think it's interesting that we've seen a number of members of Congress step up over the last few days to say that they want to give up their paychecks or at least suspend them while this is going on in a show of solidarity with the people who will actually have to make these sacrifices during the holiday season. A tough time for anybody because the budgets are tight and everybody's spending more than we probably should, or at least getting to our breaking point over the holidays. Something else from the DNC saying this. They say President Trump campaigned on his so-called deal-making skills, and yet he's proved incapable of making a deal that works for the American people. This is who the president is, a failed deal maker with the temperament of a toddler. The American people have had enough. Jason, we know it takes more than two to tango here in Washington. So tonight, a lot of pointing blame, but how do they actually get together? Because not one person can get this done. It's going to take reaching across the aisle plus the president.
Yeah, look, no doubt it was Nancy Pelosi that was adamant that there weren't the votes in the House, and it was an overwhelming vote in favor of the $5+ billion for the border wall in the House of Representatives. Again, the Democrats are failing to describe what they believe is security. They want to micromanage this. They say they want security, but they don't want a wall. They say it's an immoral wall. Well, if that's true, do they want to tear down the existing wall? Why not do the wall? And if they don't want to do the wall, what exactly do they think they're going to do? Because when you talk to the people who actually have to go in and enforce the wall, the Border Patrol, they say they want a wall. And so they are losing the argument, and they do not have the American people behind their backs. The only reason I can think of that the Democrats are opposed to this is because Donald Trump is for it, and that's the only thing.
Okay, we're just getting in a joint statement now from Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer over in the Senate and Nancy Pelosi in the House, and this is what that says. We're going to read through this a little bit here. We're going to try to. We know it's there somewhere. Here it is. Regrettably, America has now entered a Trump shutdown. That's what they're going to call it. Democrats have offered Republicans multiple proposals to keep the government open, including one that already passed the Senate unanimously, and all of which include funding for strong, sensible, and effective border security, not the president's ineffective and expensive wall. If President Trump and Republicans choose to continue this Trump shutdown, the new House Democratic majority will swiftly pass legislation to reopen the government in January. But Jamu, as we were just talking about, these same people voted for some of the things they now say are ineffective and ridiculous.
Well, Shannon, I think it's really important to have intellectual honesty with your audience. And what Congressman Chaffetz didn't mention is that the Secure Fences Act was not solely about the fence or the border aspect or the border wall aspect of it. It was about smart and effective strategies, drones. There are different ways of approaching border security. I do also find it interesting that there has been a shift in the talking points from Republicans to broaden this out to border security. But this does come down to the fact that the president thinks compromise is a bad word. And I think Republicans need to really look internally and remember when they used to criticize Democrats for making policy from polling. And now you have a president who is making policy from political commentators getting under his skin. This was dealt with earlier this week until he decided to change his mind.
We gotta leave it here.
That's not true.
Okay, we gotta leave it right here. And I know the panel's gonna come back, but we have to get to Chad Pergram for a little bit of breaking news and a little bit more explanation of what's going on. So Jamu, Brad, and Jason, please stick around. And Brad will give you the first start at this when we come back. But right now we want to check in with Chad because we've got this question about members of Congress getting paid while this thing is happening, and there are, hundreds of thousands of federal employees who may not. How does it work?
Here's the reason members of Congress will get paychecks here and why they're being paid. First of all, they passed one of the first appropriations bills they approved earlier this year was the legislative branch appropriations bills. There are 12 bills out there that fund the federal government. 7 are outstanding, and one of the 5 they approved was for the legislative branch. It's the smallest, the most narrow, but that's already done. So that money to pay members of Congress, their staff, workers here at the Capitol, that's done. Here's the other issue. It's the 27th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, the most recent amendment, and it says no law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. So when you have these government shutdowns, what happens is you say, oh, I'm not going to get paid, or we shouldn't be paying the members. The problem is that they have to pay the members because the Constitution says so.
And because they did their bill appropriating their pay before we got to this, situation that we're in now. All right, Chad, so these people who now say, I don't want to take my paycheck, it's just not an option. I mean, it's more for show? Is that
you
what
can
you're
always
saying?
put it in escrow or something like that. Okay. There's some people who say maybe they should change the Constitution or put that in. You know who got this into the Constitution?
Who was it?
There was a backbench congressman back in the early 1990s, but then he became a big deal around here, a guy named Boehner. John Andrew Boehner in his freshman term from Ohio.
All right, Chad, very helpful insight. Stick around. Thank you very much. Okay, what happens now that we're in the shutdown? Many questions, and we have the folks who have got answers. More with our power panel. We pick up malignant growths from her left lung. This is her 3rd bout with cancer since she joined the court in 1993. She'll stay in the hospital to rest and recuperate for a few days. The court says doctors found no evidence of disease anywhere else in her body, and it says no additional treatment is planned. President Trump tweeting tonight, wishing Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg a full and speedy recovery. Well, Justice Ginsburg was able to join her colleagues on the court in ruling against the president on the issue of banning asylum claims from immigrants who enter the country illegally. Chief Justice John Roberts was the swing vote, siding with the liberals. Tonight, national correspondent William Lajeunesse has details on the ruling and how many migrants are not bothering to ask for permission to cross the border.
Today's Supreme Court ruling means the immigrants seen here crossing the border illegally still have a right to claim asylum. The court ruling against an administration policy that required immigrants to seek asylum only at ports of entry. This comes as immigrants grow increasingly desperate. Wednesday, 300 Central Americans jumped vehicle barriers in the Arizona desert, one in the middle of nowhere on an Indian reservation. In El Centro, California, agents track an ultralight, arresting 2 Chinese nationals on landing.
The wall will pay for itself.
The president wants $5 billion for 215 miles of barrier to reduce illegal immigration.
Isn't Mexico supposed to pay for it? Wasn't that the campaign promise? No, that's just another lie.
Democrats may block the president's wall, but they could not stop him from erecting a different kind of barrier in Mexico, requiring asylum seekers to stay there while the U.S. processes their claims.
One, it will decrease illegal immigration, which is what we've been trying to do. 2, it will help us focus on those that have a legitimate claim.
The U.S. apprehended 62,000 illegal immigrants in November, a 60% jump over the year.
The numbers will actually go down substantially because if you need asylum, you can get it in Mexico. If you need a job, you can get a job. So we're really talking only about a very small portion who will continue to feel that they need to get asylum in the United States.
Critics say the policy denies asylum seekers their rights and endangers those waiting in Mexico.
I'm going to ask for asylum there, and I hope that the law or the measure being taken is not true.
The administration hoped the Mexico deal would relieve pressure on an overcrowded immigration system and end catch and release. Today's Supreme Court ruling suggests that is not likely to happen. Shannon?
William Lajeunesse, thank you. All right, Democrats claiming President Trump dug in on the border wall in large part due to pressure from conservative talk radio. But is the same holding true for a decision on Syria now that his esteemed defense secretary is calling it quits over policy differences? Will conservative talk radio also convince the president to reverse that decision? Trace is on the case. Good evening, Trace.
Shannon, in 1967, when he was talking about support for the Vietnam War, President Lyndon Johnson famously said, quote, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America," noting Walter Cronkite's vast influence. Now, GOP Senator Bob Corker and Democratic Senator Dick Durbin believe President Trump thinks that losing conservative radio hosts means losing his base. Corker even said this is the, quote, tyranny of talk radio hosts. Here's the reference. After first saying he would be proud to shut down the government if he doesn't get his wall funding, the president backtracked on that threat, and that infuriated conservative talkers Rush Limbaugh and Ann Coulter. Here's both.
This is textbook. It's a textbook example of what the drive-by media calls compromise. Trump gets nothing, and the Democrats get everything, including control of the House.
Trump it'll just have been a joke presidency that scammed the American people, enraged, amused the populace for a while, but he'll have no legacy whatsoever.
President Trump quickly unfollowed Ann Coulter on Twitter, but he also changed his mind on a bill to prevent a partial shutdown of the government, in essence saying it's wall funding or bust. Though it's fascinating that when the president ordered all troops out of Syria, it also drew wide conservative condemnation. Trump ally Senator Lindsey Graham said it was a mistake. Senator Marco Rubio called it a major blunder. Fox and Friends co-host Brian Kilmeade labeled it stunning and irresponsible. Yet those waiting for the president to flip on Syria could be greatly disappointed because his conservative radio base, those in favor of Trump's America First promise, approve of the decision. In fact, back in April, when President Trump bombed Syria after a suspected chemical weapons attack by Bashar Assad, Ann Coulter and Michael Savage bashed the president, saying he undermined his promise to disentangle the U.S. from global conflicts. Now that he's totally pulling out of Syria and pulling thousands of troops from Afghanistan, Rush Limbaugh says Mr. Trump is simply implementing the agenda he was elected to implement. Shannon.
Trace, thank you very much. We are just minutes from the point at which government funding runs out. Midnight, January 19th, and lawmakers were at odds again over the budget. The issue then was immigration, specifically the DACA program for those brought here illegally as children to earn a pathway to citizenship.
The vote is still open. It is 50 to 48. But the bottom line is they needed 60 yes votes, and Democrats have successfully blocked a 4-week government funding extension.
The government reopened 3 days later with hard feelings across the political spectrum. Progressive groups and so-called dreamers are still fuming. So what, if anything, can the Democratic leadership do to win them back? A month later, another brief shutdown lasting just hours, again ending with lawmakers kicking the issue down the road with another stopgap funding solution. It's a time-tested ritual, a game of political chicken with familiar rhetoric and images. Closed signs at national parks, unmanned call centers, and limited benefits for veterans, pensioners, and schools. Looking back at history, most government shutdowns are short. There were 7 closures in the Reagan era, 1 during Bush 41's administration. The impasses reached a fever in the Clinton era when a 21-day impasse led to more than 1 million federal workers furloughed and significant disruptions. None during Bush 43's time in office. Then there was 2013. The funding impasse was the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and a hardline stance against the president by congressional conservatives. The federal bureaucracy went dark for 16 days. Standard & Poor's estimated it took $24 billion out of the U.S. economy. In the end, the president promised to work for a long-term budget solution.
Because it eliminates the possibility of a shutdown for the first time or for the first 9 months of next year, Congress and I have a long runway to get some important things done.
But the fiscal discord continued when Obama passed the reins to President Trump. Now the blame game, 2018, part 3.
They're more focused on stopping the president than they are on helping the country.
The president is doing everything that he can to shut the government down. I have to ask the question, why?
Okay, so let's bring back our power panel, Jamu Green, Brad Blakeman, and Jason Chaffetz. All right, it got very spirited. We're glad that you stuck around and all of you came back. Brad, I want to start with you. What we are hearing now tonight, the president tweeting this, I guess it was yesterday now, for those of us on the East Coast, he said this: even President Ronald Reagan tried for 8 years to build a border wall or fence and was unable to do so. Others have tried. We will get it done one way or the other. Brad, what is the path to getting the wall done based on current conditions and the fact that we're going to have divided government come January?
Standing on principle and demanding to get what the president is due. Elections have consequences. This president is probably the most transactional president in recent memory. He's not an ideologue. He can make a deal. The problem is Democrats have been against this president since the day he was elected. It's a resistance. It's a visceral dislike of this president and everything he stands for. Yet this is needed. It's not a want of the president to have security on our southern and northern borders. It's a necessity. We need it. And yet Democrats are willing, as the congressman pointed out earlier, to fund sanctuary cities and to protect those who came into this country legally than preventing them from ever coming here to begin with. The president's right to stand on principle. He was elected, and he needs to continue this course. And as you've seen and pointed out in your report, that this is nothing new. We've had 22 since 1977, since the Budget Act. They've never lasted more than a month. This is political chicken. And if the president stands true to his principles and his word, he will win. But he won't win personally. Necessarily, it'll be a win for the American people.
All right, I want to ask you about something logistically and technically that's being discussed on Capitol Hill, this idea of changing the filibuster so that you don't need 60 votes to move something forward. The president wants it to go down to 51, tweeting this: Mitch, to Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, use the nuclear option and get it done. Our country is counting on you. Jason, we immediately heard a number of top senators, including several Republicans, weighing in saying, no way. If we can't run the Senate by the rules, regardless of which party is in charge, we really don't have a functioning Senate. What do you make of his call to drop that level from 60 to 51?
Well, usually it's the long-term senators that make that argument, but my challenge with that is, since the 1974 Budget Act, there's only one time since 1974 that the budget has actually moved through the process and all of those appropriations bills have moved through in proper timing. The system is totally broken. I do think there's a legitimate argument to say on appropriations bills, It should be the majority rules. I think part of the reason that the Democrats are anxious for this shutdown is they think they can just run the clock until January 3rd, and then suddenly you have a whole bunch of Republicans leaving, and Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats control the House. It works to their advantage to have this shutdown until they have stronger numbers in the House.
But it's interesting when you look back historically, because we often hear about polling numbers about who's going to get blamed for the shutdown, what it means. But when you look back in 2013, folks will remember Senator Ted Cruz reading Dr. Seuss on the floor. This was about Obamacare. They were trying to block it. The following year, even though the Republicans got completely blamed for that, they picked up 13 House seats and 9 Senate seats. Earlier in 2018, when we've had a couple of minor shutdowns already, the polls show that it was equally divided between the president and Democrats about who was to blame. Democrats picked up 40 House seats. Now, in the Senate, Republicans picked up a net. So it looks like voters maybe have shorter memories. I want to read you something else from this Vox article. The headline, "Why the Blame Game Over the Government Shutdown is Pointless." With that in mind, historically, they say few people feel an impact from it in their own lives. That's Molly Murphy, a Democratic pollster. She says they think it reflects Washington's dysfunction, which they loathe, but it is still too distant from what hits at home. Jamu, will anyone pay for this politically?
Well, I think Donald Trump has already paid for his immigration rhetoric, and that's how he lost the 40 seats, the majority of those being moderate Democrats who won. But look, I find it a little bit scary that Americans don't feel that a government shutdown affects them. Every time we go through this, and as you pointed out, this is the 3rd one this year, every time we go through this, I'm most concerned, yes, about the workers that are going to be impacted, but also about the food inspections that don't get done. I mean, there are a lot of invisible things that the federal government does that people may not be aware of, but certainly have an impact on us. The second point on the wall that I want to make is...
That was already funded, by the way. Health and Human Services was already funded.
Why has the $1.35 billion that hasn't been spent, why isn't the president using that on his wall? I understand we're talking about this now as a game of chicken, but there are real dollars that he was given last year for border security that have not been spent.
But it's all in the pipeline. It says yet to be spent. There are additional tranches of money that are needed for the wall and for other physical and technical security on the wall, Jamu. And by the way, you just heard in Shannon's report, we're going to lose much more to our economy than the $5 billion to fund border security. So you're willing to sacrifice $24 billion for $5 billion? It makes no sense.
I'm not willing to do it. I'm not the person in the White House who wrapped his arms around a shutdown and said how much he loved it, and gave it a bear hug, and gave it one of his sloppy, wet kisses that he likes to give. This is the president who has run towards this shutdown and embraced it because he thinks that governing by chaos and uncertainty is something that is productive.
First of all, I'm not sure about the sloppy wet kisses. Haven't seen those, but he did embrace this idea of having the shutdown. Now, on a lighter note, I would like to share something that is happening here in Washington, because you know how D.C. rolls. There is a local lounge. We want to put this up so people can see. And this is actually talking about exactly what you can have here in D.C. These are called the shutdown cocktails. It started at 12:01 this